Hey everyone, and welcome to more. November is a perfect month for us to do something a little bit different. We're in our vision series. We're calling "Do It Again," and as we go through this series, it is casting a little vision for the new year. And we thought, why not take a few moments each week to talk about some of the values that God has instilled into our hearts and into our lives. I'm reading a book right now by Jeff Henderson called "Know What You're For." In the book, he tells the story of driving the founder of Chick-fil-A, Truett Cathy, to a certain destination. He's talking to Mr. Cathy, and Mr. Cathy's talking to him, and Henderson says that what he learned from that conversation is something about Truett Cathy that probably makes Chick-fil-A what it is today. Here's what he said about Truett Cathy. He said, Mr. Cathy was more interested in the business building people than in people building the business. Let me say that again. He was more concerned with the business building people than he was people building the business. Now, I think about that in church world, because in church world, I think that's very similar to us and where our hope, our dream, even our values ought to be. And that is that we are dreaming to let the church build people rather than people build the church. I think that's what Jesus taught us and what the Apostle Paul taught us as well. We couch that with these words. We like to say, you've heard us say if you've been around us very long, and we really aspire to have this as our core value, and that is that we want something for you, not from you. I think that's so important for all of us to understand and for all of us to grasp and for all of us to aspire to. We want something for you, not from you. I'm thinking about two passages in the New Testament that kind of solidify these values and become the foundation. One of them from the Apostle Paul, writing to the church at Ephesus, and one of them from the words of Jesus himself as he's speaking to his disciples. Let me read the first to you. It's Ephesians chapter 4, beginning in verse 11. We read these words. Until we all, let me back up. Verse 11. And he himself gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers, equipping the saints for the work of the ministry, to build up the body of Christ, until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of God's Son, growing into maturity with a stature measured by Christ's fullness. Then we will no longer be little children, tossed by waves and blown around by every wind of teaching, by man cunning with cleverness and techniques of deceit. But speaking the truth in love, let us grow in every way into him who is the head, Christ. From him, the whole body, fitted and knit together by every supporting ligament, promotes the growth of the body for building up itself in love by the proper working of each individual part. I think Paul is saying to the church, we do indeed exist. We are here for you and not to get something from you. As a matter of fact, he mentions in that very, very short passage some terms that we're familiar with that we may need to define for a moment. He mentions, first of all, pastors. And we understand pastors. They're the spiritual leaders. We're the ones who feed the flock, protect the flock, guide the flock, lead the flock. Pastors. And then the second word is saints. He talks about saints. Now, he's not talking about St. Matthew, St. Mark, St. Luke. Saints in the sense of believers, where all of us who are believers are saints. And so the saints was each one of us. And he talks about ministry. And we all understand ministry. That's works of services, things that we do, that we're engaged in. But interesting, notice the role. Let me read that again more slowly, one of those verses. He said he gave pastors, watch this, for the equipping of the saints. So the pastor's role is to equip the saints. What's the saint's role? He equips the saint for the work of the ministry. That's interesting. So the saints, that is all of us who are believers, are to do the work of the ministry. Now, what's the role of the ministry? To build up the body of Christ. And so you see, like Truett Cathy came upon, we need to come upon. And that is that our role as a pastor, as laymen, as people in the church, our role is the work of ministry, and the work of ministry is to build up the body of Christ. And so we don't use people to build the church. Rather, the church builds people. The body builds people. We do want something for you, not something from you. Now, he talks about it again at the very end, and he says that as we grow, the promotion of growth for the body is building up itself in love. So he uses that terminology a couple of times. Jesus in the Gospel of Mark, it's also recorded in Luke's Gospel, the same account, is talking to his disciples one day about greatness. And he contrasts very sharply what we think of as greatness and what he thinks of as greatness. I don't know how you would define greatness, but probably different than Jesus defines greatness. Listen to what he said in Mark's Gospel, chapter 10. And let's see, we begin reading with verse number 42. It says, he called them over to him and he said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those in high position act as tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. On the contrary, whoever wants to become great among you will be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you will be a slave to all. For even the Son of Man, speaking of himself, did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. So Jesus verifies that greatness as he sees it is different than greatness as we think of it. Greatness is not being served. Greatness is serving. Greatness is not being exalted. Greatness is being humbled. Greatness is not getting something from people. Greatness is giving something for people. So I hope you'll take the time to look at the discussion guide and walk through that in your mind or in your group or however you're doing this video. I know people are doing it in all kinds of different ways. And so however you're approaching this, think through that discussion guide and think through a little bit of how we as the church, we as a body of believers can focus on being for people, not getting things from people. How can we capitalize on that? How can we focus on that? How can we prioritize that so that we, the church, are moving in a direction that is pleasing to the Lord? After all, he said, I didn't come to be served. I came to serve. Value number one, very, very important. We want something for you, not something from you. In fact, the Orchard Community Church exists to make disciples of the unconvinced, the unconnected, and the unfinished. And I guess that last one's all of us. Well, have a great study. Have a great time of discussion. Enjoy what God's going to show you and teach you about this great value. God bless you.